a massive opportunity with the over 50s. We're quite sidelined.
One age group has more disposable income than the millennials.
Our customers appreciate that we show older women with wrinkles, with grey hair.
They're more likely to engage with multiple emails. They're significantly more likely to be tablet users.
They're very confident people. They've got their mind made up and they are highly sceptical of marketing.
If they have a problem, they would prefer to speak to someone on the end of the telephone.
Appealing to younger customers has been a trend that we've seen with retailers and brands. Do you think that this has created a demand for brands like yours that pay attention specifically to the needs of the over 50s consumer?
Our brand is really founded on a concept of appealing directly to women really over 55, and the majority of our customers are over 60. And this was really born out the frustration of our founder, Trisha Cusden, who actually is also my mother. She was 65 and she was fed up of buying makeup that just didn't work on her skin now she was older. She was also very annoyed and frustrated by the language that the beauty industry used in terms of anti-aging, and she felt okay being 65. She didn't actually want to look younger, she just wanted to look the best version that she could. So right from the get-go, we've had this very strong message of saying it's okay to be older. We use older women, we don't airbrush, we use women who look their age, and we use the word older women a lot. We sort of confront the problem head on, we're not euphemistic about it, and we've created this very kind of unique position for ourselves in the market. We found a demand for it. We found lots of older women out there who love our message of telling it how it is.
In thinking about this whole thing, I've actually been quite nervous about using the term older and actually, using other terms like over 50 and baby boomer. So it's interesting to hear that you say that you're quite open about using that phrase and being upfront about it.
I mean, we did a lot of concept research a few years ago about older, seniors, all this kind of stuff. And they weren't bothered about the term older, which is interesting. They didn't like things like seniors and pensioner and all that kind of stuff. But older was fine.
Max, you spotted a gap for products that are specific to the over 50s market. Why do you think you've been able to get that customer that other supplement and nutrition brands haven't?
If you look down the supplement aisles, which is horrifically complex for most people to understand, there is a massive open gaping hole for the over 50s. There are a few of these so-called multivits for over 50s, over 70s, which I think is a bit of a game. I don't think they're particularly serious products. Being a boring scientist, I went right back to square one and looked at data from Public Health England in terms of what people are actually eating. You can then work out from tables what they're deficient in, and then suddenly you find out the over 50s and beyond are very, very deficient in many really important nutrients. So we decided to make the first ever tailored supplement brand where we identified particular areas of concern like muscle mass, bone density, brain health, and it goes on and on. It was very clear that they needed more supplementation. It was obvious that we could develop a brand which was tailored for that age group.
Miranda, what are your thoughts listening to both of those stories and finding out how those brands started and why? What are your thoughts about how they've been able to tap into an opportunity that traditional brands haven't?
There's a massive opportunity with the over 50s. We're quite sidelined as a group. Our readers love us because there's not that much for them. There's nowhere they can go where they see themselves and their own issues and their own passions and interests and everything represented by people that actually look like them. Actually, it's a brilliant area to work in. Lots of areas are actually overcrowded marketplaces. They're very engaged and passionate and very keen to see themselves represented.
Fashion and beauty brands, when they do know that their customer is in that over 50 or over 60 category, they do tend to use models that are in their 30s and 40s. And one of the things that marketers will tell you is that that customer wants to see an aspirational image and they don't see themselves as being old. Now, do you think that's true, or do you think that's just something that marketers want to believe?
Maybe marketers are just a bit younger than the rest of us. I don't know. Certainly from our perspective, when we feature models that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, we are inundated with positive responses. I definitely don't think it's true that we are aspiring to be any younger than we are. We know the age we are. We're owning it. We just want to see people who look like us but slightly better. Do you know what I mean? Like in all magazines. We've actually got an initiative called Real, where we've invited real people, non-models, to take part, and 600 people came to take part in this initiative. And we've done 2 really successful shoots, and our aim is to use real people a lot more in our fashion and beauty pages.
And what are your thoughts on fashion and beauty brands using younger models? So do you agree with Miranda that the over 50s customer wants to see themselves truly reflected and not in the eyes of a younger model?
That's definitely our experience. Our customers tell us a lot that they appreciate that we show older women with wrinkles, with grey hair. When we partner with fashion brands in particular, we often run into this issue. Our customer profile is quite similar to theirs, but they'll be using very thin models that are usually in their kind of late 20s or early 30s. And we actually had this conversation with a founder. Patricia challenged her and said, why do you use younger models in your direct mail? And she said, because no one aspires to being older, and we want to be an aspirational brand. I've also come across brands that say, well, the focus group told us that women like to see younger women used in advertising for our clothes, so that's why we use younger women. There's 2 things going on. There's the brands that are kind of frightened to use older women, and there's also a kind of, if the focus groups are true, mindset change that perhaps we are conditioned by society to a certain extent to want to see clothes on younger women. I don't think it's as straightforward as saying, it's all the fault of the fashion brands. People are not lying in focus groups, that has to come from women themselves to push forward the change. And also, just one thing to pick up on, I think there's quite a difference between a woman in her early 50s and a woman in her early 70s. And I think sometimes the sort of homogenous mass of over 50s doesn't take that into account. And a lot of our customers are well into their 60s and 70s. And I'd say their attitudes are probably slightly different to someone in their early 50s in terms of the way they feel about aging.
QVC is one of your biggest routes to market. So how important has that relationship been with that retailer to driving awareness and trust with Prime 50?
Very, very important. The QVC has massively increased brand awareness, and it has meant for the first time somebody like myself can actually educate or talk to and make clearer the complex field of nutrition. When I went down to present to the buyer a few years ago, she was absolutely adamant that, first of all, this is perfect for our demographic, because the QVC demographic is typically over 50, 60. They're reasonably well off, and therefore it was a perfect demographic. Being from a scientific background, what I wanted to do was not the hard sell. All I did was really talk about health, wellness, longevity, deficiency. You guys are all deficient, you need these products, you're more prone to chronic disease and chronic ailments later in life. The data says that we're nearly all deficient, and being in that age group myself, well into it, it was nice because I could talk firsthand. The beauty about being on QVC though, it helps actually me stand up and talk to somebody for 10 minutes. It actually allows me to put up a few slides, talk to them about a few facts, and they go away thinking, that sounds right, blah, blah, blah. I've never had a supplement before. Yeah, I hear what you say. I'm going to try these. All the videos are uploaded onto the QVC website so that people can always go back and look at the QVC presentation, which a lot of people do. And I think that really, really works well.
And what impact do you see on sales through your own e-commerce channel after you've appeared on QVC?
Yeah, we see a spike every time I go on. Certainly after a 1-hour show, some of these viewers, they think, I like that, but before I buy from QVC, I'm just going to check out the website. Typically the website is a similar cost, but sometimes there are some very good deals on the website.
Stelios, what can you tell us about social media usage by customers in the age category that we're talking about today?
So social media usage by the older demographic, like 55 plus or 50 plus, has increased a lot over the last couple of years. This is driven by the fact that they're actually spending more money on tech. So in 2018, 2019, that demographic spent in the US, that's the US data, they spent $1 trillion or close to $1 trillion in tech. And that's smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, home assistants. And as a result, they end up spending a lot more time on their devices. So the 50 plus demographic spends 5 hours per day on the smartphones, compared to 5.7 hours for the millennials. So you can actually see that, but the big difference here is that one age group has a lot more disposable income than the millennials. So that's kind of like makes a big difference. And when we look at the users, by far, Facebook is the leader here, with 46% of the 65 plus having an account or using Facebook, and then it's 68% for the 50 to 64. The next interesting thing is YouTube. That's for UK, they've got 93% reach on the 55 plus. And on average, they're watching 22 minutes of videos every day. So they're watching more things around things to do. So for example, for women, it is makeup, kind of like similar to kind of like products that Anna at Look Fabulous Forever selling, baking, and animal content. So that's the kind of like the core channels. For men, 55 plus, slightly different, a lot more about gardening, golf, and scale modeling, and then it's music. So Instagram, on the other hand, has been an increase over the last few years, but the percentage of the 65 plus is quite low. It's only 10%, but that's increasing, especially due to the pandemic. The other kind of like channel we don't talk much about is Pinterest. So Pinterest grown a lot over the last few years, but they capture 16% of the market for the 65 plus. So it's quite big. But overall, Facebook is a leader. YouTube is kind of like very, very strong up there, and then Pinterest.
And David, what are your thoughts? You work with a lot of brands, so what are your thoughts on the different channels that the age group that we're talking about today are using?
So, pushing towards 70% of 50 to 64-year-olds are on Facebook and using it more regularly than most millennials. They have significantly less penetration on the likes of TikTok and Snapchat, but that's not where you're finding them. You are able to find them on Facebook, to a certain extent on Instagram and Pinterest, and actually beginning to a larger extent on Twitter. So the penetration on Twitter, you just have to look at the number of people over 50s who are following Stephen Fry, for example. You can see that there's a really big penetration on Twitter. In terms of e-commerce and the important things for this audience, they tend to pre-research things for a longer period than younger customers, which means that organic search and brand paid search are going to be a really important part of your media mix to make sure that you're there when they very first start looking, making sure that you're really well aligned on organic search and your brand and long tail search. Research has shown that they tend to pay attention to reviews and recommendations significantly more than the younger audience. So making sure that you've got a well-reviewed product site, that the e-com part of that is properly up and running. Other e-com channels that work particularly well, email. Our research shows that they're more likely to engage with multiple emails than any other age of audience, possibly because they have a little bit more time on their hands. And then there's the bit that people frequently forget, which is the paid display. Understand where your audience is likely to be. Do the kind of old-fashioned thing you used to do when working out what newspapers doing to do press ads in. Work out where your audience are and make sure that you're talking to them in the arenas they're in. And then remembering they're significantly more likely to be tablet users than anyone else, and their time spent on mobile, as Stelios said, is rising rapidly and higher than for most millennials. So you've got to make sure that it's a seamless and easy journey on those devices, bearing in mind that a number of the people, if they're anything like me, I'm having to hold my phone further and further away each week and each month, making sure your website is easy to use. Don't have everything in 3-point font when it comes up on a mobile phone, make it easy to use.
One of the things that you mentioned there, how that customer does things differently, more research, looking at reviews a lot more than other age groups. Max, so when we're looking at all of this, the over 50s market is not homogenous. It does include lots of different generations. But what would you say makes the cohort unique in terms of how they shop and trust brands in your experience?
They are a very challenging bunch. I've sat in many concept groups in my long career with Reckitt Benckiser, and they've all been nicely controlled, blah, blah, blah. We sat in these groups. I tell you, they were difficult groups to control because they're very confident people. They've got their mind made up, and they are highly skeptical of marketing people, to be honest. They do not like being talked down to. They don't like being marketed to, and they are very skeptical.
And Kevin, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences, or what research is there on user experience preferences by the over 50s consumer?
We just finished a project aimed squarely at the over 50s. We found a Pew report that mentioned that 51% of over 50s in 2018 spent more than 15 hours online, which is a lot more than millennials. Particularly from an online point of view, I think one of the most important things we found was that over 50s really need to trust the brands that they're interacting with or buying from online. Particularly security is a very, very important factor. When people are giving up their details, when they're obviously putting bank card details into checkouts. I've just started wearing glasses as well because my arm wasn't getting long enough to be able to see my phone. And I think we need to consider potential physical limitations. So we need to give the user the ability or the choice to adjust size of content in particular text. The good thing is this age group spend longer to navigate websites, so about 43% longer to navigate websites than other age groups. And the other good thing is they're not distracted by TikTok and stuff like that, so short form content. They actually like to read long form content, and I think that potentially this comes from traditionally reading newspapers and publications. The idea of keeping the content on one page rather than taking them off to different parts of the website really works for this age group. The over 50s, when they're online, if they have a problem, they would prefer to speak to someone to solve the problem. And I mean by speaking to someone, actually speaking to someone, not like a chatbot or anything like that, but someone on the end of the telephone. So they're not going to want to solve their problems online in the same way that millennials will when they're having issues.
How do you go about balancing design projects? So if the research tells you that consumer wants one thing, but within a brand, you kind of have an instinct that the consumer wants something different. How do you go about balancing how you approach projects?
Someone mentioned focus groups earlier. I mean, all that information is great. And I think from a UX point of view, we're talking about quantifiable data, because it's actual stuff you can see that people are doing. From a design and communication point of view, what we try to steer clear of is creating me-too communications. We recently had a project where a client came to us and said, these are our competitors, I really like these, I want something like this. So we went back with something completely different. At the end of the project, the client actually paid us a real nice compliment on actually taking him right out of his comfort zone and delivering something that added value to their brand and their product, but also made them stand out in the marketplace.
We're talking about age, but actually, there's a huge group of people within that over 50s category. Do you think that looking at age as a way to segment customers is becoming more redundant, or is it still a useful segmentation tool?
A third of the UK population is over 50, which makes it very difficult to treat them as one big homogenous group. My brother's 50, my dad's 70, our family grandma is 90. Those are very, very different people who have very different expectations and aspirations from life. And those are people who've grown up and been brought up at very different points in history. I think we need to understand that over 50 is just too big. Let's say we manage to group 50 to 65 together. Actually, they're going to be very different people within those groups. It's actually much more useful to think about people from an attitudinal point of view. There are 70-year-old trail runners and there are 50-year-old people who'd rather sit in front of the telly all day and watch TV. It's very difficult to then try and be really clear about what's an over 50 and what's an over 50 likely to want to do. I think it's becoming less and less important, the actual number, and more important about the attitude that comes with that number on the age. While age is it's an indicator, it certainly needs to be pulled alongside a whole load of other information in order to get a real understanding of what the customer is likely to want and need. Customers will give you some data points naturally by how they've come to you, what media they've used. It may well be that you need to overlay that with some other external data to really understand some attitude, to get some attitudinal understandings of your customers, or you could do the really crazy thing and actually talk to them and find out what they want and find out what they like, and then try and create different cohorts of customers within your base where you can understand their behaviour and their wants and needs in a slightly different way.
Anna, what's your experience of loyalty? So when they do find your brand, Are you finding they're sticking with you?
We quite often hear the phrase, "I'm so glad I found you." So yeah, we don't have a problem with repeat rate. We have around 38% repeat rate within 12 months, which is above, I think the normal in beauty is around 30%. So we're pretty pleased with our repeat rate. And I think when you give someone something that they really love and they really value, then they'll come back and get more from you. And I think this age group is particularly keen to, once they find something that they're really pleased with, that they'll come back and continue to buy it. So yeah, I'd say they're a pretty loyal group in our experience.
And how does the content that you produce help with that?
It helps hugely. I mean, I think since we started the business 7 years ago, Trisha is this authentic voice of the older woman. So she's now 72. But in terms of attitude, she's got lots of attitudes and ideas that kind of chime with our customers. So she writes a blog that goes out on email every Sunday. And we have huge readership and sometimes hundreds of comments on her blog. And we started a Facebook community called Trisha's Super Troopers. What's happened recently has really affected this group, more so than any other group. So providing them with a safe space, a place to come and express their fears, doubts and worries, but also celebrate things. So we have lots of people posting pictures of their wedding anniversaries or being reunited with grandchildren. Community and content both are very important to us as a brand and really help people feel connected. Just to go back to Trisha's role as this authentic voice, they see her as someone that they can relate to, but also someone that challenges them, encourages them to wear a bright lipstick, encourages them to wear a pink coat or whatever it is. But she kind of says, it's okay, you can be older, but you can have fun, you can wear great clothes, you can still look fabulous.
Miranda, how do you keep in tune with what the woman and home reader and your demographic is interested in?
It helps to be in the demographic. It's a real pleasure to work somewhere where you totally relate to everything that you're writing about. So we also have a really engaged audience, as I said, and people will write in and tell you what they liked and what they didn't like. But, really one's looking around to see what one's own issues are and what one's interested oneself.
Stelios, you shared some statistics about e-commerce usage and transaction size by age quite early on in the pandemic. How has that data changed since then?
When we analyzed our client mix, we saw that over 65s increased by 190% in terms of transactions, and with a 55 plus increased by 110%. We saw we saw a drop in June, July in that segment, but then again it spiked up again. So now we are seeing similar patterns with what was happening before. The over 65s, we're seeing 136% increase year on year. For the 55s, we're seeing the 152% increase year on year. So the over 65s dropped slightly. The 55 to 64 still continues kind of really, really high.
And Miranda, what's been your experience of the shift from traditional to digital?
We offer sort of two experiences. So the digital is the sort of lean in experience, and the print magazine is a lean back experience and a more relaxing experience where, the warm bath experience where when you go to a digital, you're more you've got more intent, haven't you? But certainly in the pandemic, there was increased traffic and increased social.
David, print continues to be an important marketing medium for brands that are targeting the over 50s consumer.
Print can certainly be, in fact, offline media in general can be a really important channel in targeting this audience. The way in which to understand how it's working and understand how these channels are interacting is putting together a really clear and precise way of measuring the incremental impact of each of the channels that you add. And you'll find in most channels that 1 + 1 really does equal more than 2. Print on its own will deliver a certain response. Print plus the digital channels will deliver more than either of those two channels will deliver on their own, and will generally more than pay for the investment in both of those areas.